Welcome to Origin of Solutions, the ESCAP podcast where we highlight innovative approaches to some of the most urgent challenges facing Asia and the Pacific. I'm Sompot Supputhamongkhon. In today's episode, we turn to the Pacific, where the impacts of climate change are already shaping lives, livelihoods, and communities. Rising sea levels, extreme weather, and environmental changes are forcing people to move, sometimes permanently, sometimes temporarily. This brings new challenges, but also opportunities to build safer, more secure futures. In 2023, Pacific leaders endorsed the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility, a landmark agreement developed through wide consultations and with strong collective support from UN partners and regional organizations. This framework is now guiding countries in planning for migration, protecting human rights, and strengthening human security in the face of climate change. We're joined today by Nobuko Kajiura and Emberson from ESCAP Pacific Office and Nacanielli Bolo from the Pacific Platform on this disaster displacement. Together, they're helping us understand how Pacific voices are shaping solutions to climate mobility and what lies ahead for the region. Nava, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? What first inspired to focus your work on disaster displacement?
Hello, and thank you for having us in this podcast. I serve as a regional advisor on disaster displacement for the platform on disaster displacement. Prior to this role, I was also the regional advisor for the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. I have been managing an EU-funded disaster displacement project implemented in Fiji, Tonga, Vanuatu, Marshall Islands, and the Solomon Islands. I have a background in environmental science and policy, and I've been working on climate mobility space, especially internal displacement and planned relocation for the past 6 years.
Peter, how about you?
My background is in climate diplomacy and regional cooperation. Before joining ESCAP, I served with the Fijian Ministry of Foreign Affairs as Director of Climate Change and later as Director Multilaterals, where I followed this work from the very beginning of the PCCMHS program, and it was launched in 2019. I joined ESCAP as a full-time consultant in 2022 to support the regional efforts on climate mobility, and later joined the University of the South Pacific in 2023.
Nobuko, you have had an interesting career trajectory at ESCAP covering several duty stations. Could you tell us about your journey here?
Thank you very much. I'm working as Economic Affairs Officer. I joined Pacific Office in late 2021. I was in a Subregional office in Incheon, covering Northeast Asia countries. And now, since I have joined here, I have been involved in this work on the climate mobility in the Pacific. I have been also working closely in coordinating the project that Peter mentioned about the Pacific climate mobility, climate change, migration, and human security, which is actually the joint work with other UN agencies.
So one of the common questions we ask on every episode is, what solutions are you working on for the region?
We live in a region that's quite vulnerable to a lot of climate change issues, and climate mobility is one of the prominent ones. At the moment, my support role, both to PDD and our partner ESCAP, has been on the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility. It is a forward-thinking and proactive document that details where every practical action considers the future reality of different types of movement due to climate change, and enabling an environment where countries and the region as a whole are equipped and informed and ready to face the brunt of the reality of climate movement. The support that I provide is strengthening institutions to ensure that there's improvement in their governance, to inform and provide the needed wisdom to this practical action that needs to be done, to support fundamentally the people that are affected, that are forced to move away from their residence due to the various impacts of climate change.
From my point of view, basically this idea of coming up as a region to try to address supporting the vulnerable population if and when people has to move because of the climate change. ESCAP as a regional organization, this is where we can actually support together with the partners to see how the Pacific as a region can come together to address these climate issues, which actually is front and center of the issues in the Pacific, which probably is a bit different from the Asia countries.
Similar to what Nobuko and Nava has mentioned right now, our work and fortunately my studies It's centered on helping Pacific countries and communities turn the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility into practical action. So how do we turn this framework into an implementable, action-oriented document? So that means strengthening cooperation among governments, supporting national policies, and ensuring that communities and civil society and all those stakeholders involved are actively involved in shaping how our Pacific region responds to climate-related movement. This is done jointly with 5 other partners, including ESCAP. So it's exciting times as to how we make this framework really answer and respond to the needs of affected vulnerable communities.
So, what does climate mobility mean in the Pacific context, and how is it already affecting people's lives and communities?
The term climate mobility is used as an umbrella term to refer to any type of movement, whether it is forced or voluntary. It can be temporary as well or permanent, and it can be within or across borders. So that's the depth and breadth of what climate mobility is. That's basically stipulated in the framework. And that may occur in the context of climate change and the extreme events brought about by the changing climate. What's unique in our understanding of climate mobility is that it doesn't stop at just defining climate mobility in terms of displacement, planned relocation, and migration as adaptation. First and foremost, in the way we define climate mobility here in the region is the fact that staying in place is top of the priority. That's captured in the framing of climate mobility here in the Pacific. And one of the newness of how this framing comes about is also capturing the other form of mobility, which includes stranded migrants. Now, as we look into mobility as per se, it varies for different countries. The experience is differently. For many, forced movement is a constant experience in every cyclone and flooding events. The loss of livelihoods, the impacts on education and health, erosion of social cohesion or relationship within communities and family units, the overwhelming impacts of psychological trauma, and of course, the increasing trends of violence and exploitation of women, elderlies, and young girls. It is becoming a lived reality as a repercussion of internal displacement.
And just to add to that, so in the Pacific, climate mobility, as you've heard, is about the way people move or may have to move because of climate impacts like sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, more intense, severe storms, change in rainfall patterns, so drought might force people to move. So for some, it means moving temporarily to access jobs, education, safety, and security when their local livelihoods are disrupted. So for others, it might mean a more planned, considered relocation within a country or even across borders when you're unable to stay or reside in your usual place. So importantly, it's not just about movement. It's about ensuring that people, when they do move, they do so with dignity, safety, and they choose it. So it's a considered choice. And for those that choose to stay back, that they are able to live decent and worthwhile lives, able to still enjoy the full and broad spectrum of their culture and traditions and their human rights. The people derive much of their sense of identity, not just their ability to live on the land based on their traditional ecological knowledges, to be able to do certain things because of their knowledge of weather and their knowledge of the rhythms of their ecosystem. So lunar rhythms and how it relates to the sea and how it relates to certain species of fish or flowers and what it means for access to food security and access to rituals of rites of passage, etc. Because of that knowledge, indigenous people derive their whole worldview, their cosmological sense of place and identity is very much linked to geography that has been honed over thousands of years. And so when the whole discourse or discussion about having to move comes into the agenda, it's quite difficult for indigenous peoples, not just in the Pacific, but in the whole world, to see themselves moving to a completely different place, because it then means their knowledge, their whole sense of identity and the ability to exist.
Why was the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility endorsed by leader in 2023 such an important milestone?
The endorsement was significant because it was the first time Pacific leaders came together to adopt a shared regional approach on climate mobility. It recognizes that no single country can address this challenge alone, and it requires collective action. So the framework gives governments a clear, regionally agreed blueprint for policy, cooperation, and support, and it anchors climate mobility firmly within the broader regional climate and sustainable development agenda.
From a global policy landscape, the endorsement of the 2023 Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility was significant because it marked the leadership of Pacific Island nation in addressing the issue. It was celebrated as a global first policy instrument that drew the attention of the global community to the agenda. Now, if we remember, that was coming out during a time when the high-level panel on internal displacement that was established by the UN Secretary General was coming to an end. And it was also during the time when there was a midterm review of the Sendai Framework, and more so building up to the review of the Global Compact on migration. So this is significant because it also positioned Pacific Island nation as solution contributors to this global phenomenon. We are not just victims, but we are owning the issue, and we are telling the world and sharing with the world that there is something that can be done. And it can be done only through collaboration and working together, not only among countries and partners, but also with the communities themselves. Secondly, the political buy-in was crucial to making progressive actions at national level to address the growing numbers of communities being displaced either permanently and temporarily in every disaster events. While the reality was hard to grasp given the gap in monitoring movement, every sudden onset event was exposing the extreme reality faster than it could have ever been. So we couldn't delay it any further. As solution delayed is also justice denied to the people that are being forced to move.
This framework reflects strong collaboration between governments, UN agency, and civil society, traditional leaders, regional partners, and all that. So what role has this collective support play in moving the agenda forward, and what lessons can other regions learn from this collaboration?
This collaboration under the framework, it actually has two parts. One is collaboration with partners, but it's also consultation with the stakeholders. Pacific governments led this process of developing and endorsing the developmental framework, and it was actually led by the Joint Working Group on Climate Mobility, which was co-chaired by the government of Fiji and Tuvalu, while the regional partners like ESCAP, IOM, ILO, OHCHR, Platform for Disaster Displacement, and the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, we all provided the technical support. So these are the collaboration to support the government, and consultation in the sense that during this process, civil society, traditional leaders and communities brought the lived experience and grounded the solution to the table.
Just to reiterate, the collaboration has truly been the cornerstone of this journey. So from the outset, Pacific governments took ownership of the process through the Joint Working Group on Climate Mobility, set up especially to oversee this work, co-chaired by Fiji and Tuvalu, ensuring that priorities were defined by those mostly affected. And this leadership created a strong political mandate and a clear regional vision. And at the same time, regional and international partners played a vital role by providing the technical expertise, policy analysis, and coordination support needed to translate that vision into actionable strategies with the help of key community stakeholders. So non-state actors were very much part of this journey. Their contributions helped bridge the gap between global frameworks and regional realities, national realities, ensuring that Pacific perspectives informed and were aligned with international norms and commitments. We wouldn't have gotten this far if it wasn't for the collaboration and the support of the various organizations and community leaders that have been part of this journey so far.
Beyond just the number of stakeholders and the number of partners that needed to come together to materialize this great effort, the Pacific in itself is quite diverse geographically, but also in terms of culture, the way we think and act, attitude are very different. So this was a necessary approach in order to, one, get the buy-in of the countries, given that we needed to have their leadership and ownership of the process. But secondly, was the fact that we don't know much about the climate mobility discourse in the region. So the only way to know is to listen. And when we work together, we actually allow ourselves to sit and listen and learn from the people that are with their affected population.
What are the next steps for turning the framework into action on the ground, and how can the international community continue to support Pacific countries as they face the realities of the climate mobility?
We're now focused on turning the framework into real action through its newly approved and endorsed implementation plan, working together with PIFs and Pacific governments to translate regional commitments into national policies and to strengthen institutional capacity and build momentum towards practical and people-centered cross-border cooperation. The international community has an important role in this next phase or this next chapter by providing sustained and predictable financing to invest in data, research, early warning systems, and support locally driven adaptation solutions. Approaches such as peer-to-peer learning exchanges between Pacific countries can be especially powerful, helping communities share lessons, scale up good practices, and ultimately reduce the risks and costs associated with climate-related movements.
Building on the peer-to-peer learning, moving forward, this also provides an opportunity beyond just the Pacific. During the formulation phase of the implementation plan, we had already tested this with the government of Bangladesh, having Fiji government, a delegation going to Bangladesh to learn from them on urban land relocation, and Bangladesh coming into Fiji to then understudy the whole governance and policy framework and the financial mechanism set up to support a whole plan relocation process. So it provides that opportunity moving forward to share a lot of the extensive know-how in these different forms of climate mobility. Secondly, moving forward is also to think beyond a sectorial approach when it comes to climate mobility. The whole issue around displacement and plan relocation cuts into our health sector, agriculture sector. So this conversation needs to be taken to them. So it provides that opportunity. Now that we have a common framing, now that we have what needs to be done, a lot of what's already available out there in the sectors are not necessarily stuck in climate change and DRR.
Thank you for sharing the incredible stories and work, and it has been so insightful to learn from your expertise and perspective. Before we wrap up, what would you like our listeners to take away from today's conversation?
Climate mobility is not a challenge on the horizon for us in the Pacific. It's already shaping the lives, our choices, and the futures of Pacific peoples today. But this reality does not have to be defined by loss or displacement. With the right policy, strong partnerships, and sustained investment, mobility can become a pathway for resilience, dignity, and self-determination. So my call to action is simple yet urgent. Stay engaged with the work of the Pacific Climate Mobility Program. Take an interest in it and support efforts that ensure Pacific communities remain agents of their own destiny, not passive subjects of their circumstances. So visit ESCAP's Pacific office and connect with the other 5 implementing partners to learn how collaboration is driving progress. Together, we can shape a future where movement is not a sign of vulnerability, but a strategy for survival, empowerment, and hope.
No one is immune to climate mobility. I think if it's a reality check that we need to do today, is that very thing, that no one is immune. Whether you're in Fiji or you're in Bangkok or even in Geneva or New York, at some point in your life, this is going to happen, given the climate crisis, if nothing is done on cutting down our emissions today. The complexity of the impact is rather daunting and challenging. And this is where the call for collaboration, I will continue to reiterate, is necessary in order to address this very issue that's already becoming a reality for every household and community here in the region.
That's a nice way to wrap up our conversation today. So that's all for today's episode of A Region of Solutions. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and be part of the solution for our region. Thank you.